The sun dipped low over the arid expanse of the Texas Panhandle, its dying light casting a golden hue over the land that seemed to whisper the secrets of its past. Dust swirled in lazy eddies, brought to life by the sporadic gusts of wind that rattled the skeletal remains of abandoned homesteads. Amid this desolate beauty stood a figure, a woman named Clara, whose face bore the imprints of loss more clearly than the lines of the distant mesas. Each crease and furrow told a silent story of a life once lived in hope, now shadowed by despair. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the frayed hem of her dress, the fabric worn thin from patching and mending. She gazed out over the horizon, her heart heavy with the weight of absence. The memories of laughter shared and dreams woven together with her late husband Samuel lingered like ghosts in the air. Their little house, a sanctuary once filled with love, now stood silent, the echoes of joy replaced by an oppressive quietude. Clara had buried her heart beside him in that shallow grave, the earth taking him too soon, leaving her adrift in an unforgiving world. As night fell and the sky darkened, Clara felt the chill of loneliness creeping in, wrapping itself around her like the encroaching shadows. The nights were the hardest. They stretched on endlessly, each minute a reminder of her solitude. She would sit by the dimly lit fire, coaxing life from the stubborn embers, the flickering flames mirroring the flickers of hope she could scarcely hold on to. Food had grown scarce, and with each passing day, the struggle to survive became a battle against both nature and her own wavering spirit. But it was not the harshness of the land that had honed her nightmares. It was the flicker of life she once knew, now extinguished. Clara recalled the moments of joy shared with Samuel, the plans they had forged together under the sprawling, starlit sky. Those dreams were now flickers of light in her mind, taunting her like fireflies amidst a storm. Desperation had set in, clenching her heart and suffocating her spirit. The world felt unbearably vast, and she, insignificant, a mere wisp of existence against the backdrop of so many histories, so much loss. Yet, a change was stirring on the wind. The distant sound of hoofbeats echoed across the plains, a rhythm that sent a shiver down her spine. Two Comanche warriors appeared on the horizon, silhouettes against the dimming light, riding with purpose. Clara's heart quickened, a mixture of fear and uncertainty coursing through her. Long had she been taught to view the indigenous people as adversaries, yet in this moment she was transfixed. Their presence was alive with an energy she had long thought extinguished within herself. They approached with caution, their eyes scanning the landscape, and Clara found herself standing still, caught in a fragile balance between dread and a flicker of hope. In the silence that stretched between them, she sensed an understanding, a shared recognition of the struggle for survival that bound them all. As the young warriors drew closer, their expressions remained unreadable. Yet Clara felt an inexplicable pull toward the truth that flickered just beyond her grasp. This encounter could either seal her fate or offer a sliver of redemption, the outcome resting in the invisible thread of choices yet to be made. The air hung heavy with expectancy as Clara steadied her breath, the fading light painting the world in hues of indigo and burnt orange. She felt the world slip beneath her feet, a communion between her heart and the silence of the land. As the two warriors slowed, she noticed how they moved with an elegance that belied their daunting presence. Each horse was a creature of sinew and spirit, their muscles rippling beneath the taut leather saddles, but it was their riders who drew Clara's full attention, a young man and a boy, perhaps no more than 16 summers old. The elder of the two, a man with wild black hair that caught the wind like the flames of her fire, seemed to embody the very essence of the untamed land. His eyes, dark and piercing, held the stories of the earth, the hardship and the resilience woven into the fabric of his being. He radiated an intensity that pulled Clara closer, yet kept her at bay, an enigmatic presence that spoke of ancient truths. The boy, smaller yet equally fierce, mirrored the older man's posture, his youthful face betraying a glimpse of the innocence still clinging to life amidst their harsh existence. Fearful and fascinated all at once, Clara felt her heart quicken as they closed the distance between them. In that moment, Clara's mind raced, grappling with the tales of wrath and bloodshed that had been inked into her memory. Long had she been warned of the dangers that stalked these lands, the fear of the enemy instilled in her since childhood. But here, before her, was a different narrative, one that shimmered with the promise of understanding. She felt as though she teetered on the brink of a precipice, where the wind whispered secrets that had been hidden away for far too long. Each beat of her heart urged her to look beyond the stories she had been taught, to see the humanity that lay before her, echoing her own despair. The young warrior dismounted, his movements graceful and deliberate, as if he were stepping into a sacred space. He approached Clara, his gaze unflinching, and in that moment, a profound silence enveloped them. There was no hostility in his stance, only a weary recognition that spoke of shared pain. Clara stood rooted to the spot, her breath shallow, as she read the emotions cascading through the depths of his eyes. He reached out, slowly extending his hand, palm upturned. The sun dipped lower still, cloaking them in twilight as if to lend them some semblance of privacy, a momentary sanctuary from the outside world. The boy remained mounted, his eyes darting between the two, a whirl of apprehension and curiosity flickering within their depths. Clara could feel the boy's gaze upon her, an unspoken question hanging in the air. Would she accept this fragile truce? Would she embrace a lifeline thrown across the chasm of grief that seemed to widen before her? The warmth of the boy's presence grounded her, reminding her that there was still life amid the desolation, a sliver of connection waiting to be forged. As Clara's heart wrestled with the choice that lay before her, the world around them faded into insignificance. The wind shifted again, ruffling the skirts of her dress and carrying with it the faint scent of sage, an aroma that felt like a balm on her parched spirit. She took a tentative step forward, her pulse thrumming in her ears, buoyed by a cascade of emotions that had long been bottled inside her. The future stretched before her like a vast expanse, filled with both danger and promise. In that singular moment, the weight of her sorrow began to lift slightly, as if the very air crackled with the possibility of change, of redemption that was both feared and longed for. Clara knew instinctively that she stood at the precipice of something profound, the fear of what lay ahead mingling with a burgeoning hope. The truth awaited, woven intricately into the fabric of their shared humanity, a truth that could either shatter her remaining illusions or ignite a spark of strength she had thought extinguished. As if sensing her resolve, the young warrior offered a tentative smile, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were not so different after all. In that instant, she understood that her despair might yet evolve into something far greater, tethered to the lives of those who inhabited this land long before her. The silence stretched between Clara and the young warrior, a fragile thread spun from the weight of two lives burdened by loss. Her gaze flickered between the outstretched hand and the eyes that held unspoken stories of survival and sorrow. The sun dipped lower, blurring the horizon into a tapestry of purple and gold as night began to wrap its arms around the land. The moment quickened, a heartbeat suspended in time, where the past converged with a flickering possibility. Clara took a breath, a trembling inhale that drew the scent of sage deeper into her lungs. She moved forward, tentative yet bold, her hand meeting his in a gesture laden with uncharted significance. The warmth of his touch ignited embers of a long-dormant spirit within her. It was a communion, forged not of words, but of shared recognition. With a gentle squeeze, the young warrior anchored her, a silent promise woven into the fabric of their clasped hands. She was not alone, and perhaps the weight of despair could be shared. The boy, still mounted, watched with keen eyes, his youthful features softening as he felt the air shift around them. Clara could see the curiosity spark in him, a mirror of her own wonder. As time slowed in this ephemeral bubble, she felt the hard edges of her grief soften, the relentless ache of solitude retreating, if only slightly. Their connection throbbed with potential, an invitation to step beyond the confines of fear and into a realm where understanding could blossom like wildflowers after the rain. But the moment was not without its shadows. Clara's heart quickened again as she felt the gravity of choices yet unseen. Would their shared humanity lead to compassion or conflict? The stories of blood and vengeance echoed in her thoughts, threats that loomed like dark clouds on the horizon. Yet, the young warrior's steady gaze held her, and in it she found not the embodiment of an enemy, but a mirror reflecting her own struggle for survival against a land that had grown harsh and unforgiving. In a sudden movement, the young warrior released her hand, stepping back slightly, and with a subtle nod, he motioned to the boy. The child dismounted, eyes wide with newfound understanding as he walked toward Clara, his movements imbued with a mixture of admiration and trepidation. He held out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. As he unfolded it, the simple handmade offering revealed a small portion of jerky, tough yet nourishing, preserved through the very land that felt hostile to her. Clara's breath caught, a rush of gratitude flowing through her as she recognized the weight of their gesture, a lifeline thrown her way amid the vastness of despair. Clara reached out, her fingers brushing against the jerky, a gift that felt like an act of defiance against the solitude that had become her constant companion. A rush of emotion surged within her as she met the gaze of the young man, whose features had softened into a semblance of kinship. The tension in the air shifted, heavy with the promise of connection, a shared understanding that transcended language and history. In that moment, she grasped that compassion could be born from the unlikeliest of encounters, a flicker of humanity igniting in the darkness. As Clara accepted the offering, something profound stirred within her, a deep yearning for connection, not just for survival, but for the simple understanding that existed beyond the barriers of fear. She felt the yearning bridge the chasm of her grief, and a whisper of hope stirred like the wind sweeping across the plains. Together, they stood, two warriors of their own kind, bound by the struggles of their separated worlds. The night began to settle around them, but instead of loneliness, warmth blossomed, filling the hollow spaces they had each carried for so long. Beyond the pain, they began to glimpse the glimmer of healing, rooted in a compassion neither had expected but was desperately needed. The night wrapped around Clara like a shroud, the air thick with the mingled scent of burnt sage and the distant echoes of her own heart's tumult. The young warrior's hand, firm yet gentle, had lingered on hers, a tether to something alive that stirred within her, fighting to be heard above the cacophony of her despair. As she accepted the jerky from the boy, the simple act felt monumental, an unwritten promise entwined with the threads of their shared existence. Yet a tempest brewed beneath the surface, an undercurrent of unease that threatened to shatter this fragile moment. Clara's eyes drifted between the two warriors, searching for comprehension in the silence that enveloped them. The elder's gaze was penetrating, the darkness of his eyes holding centuries of wisdom and unspoken grief. He too knew the weight of loss, the ache of a heart that had learned to navigate a world too often marked by sorrow. Yet here he stood, embodying resilience, a living testament to the truth that struggled to break free from the constraints of prejudice that had clouded Clara's understanding. Caught in the crossfire of her feelings, she felt both an urge to retreat into the safety of her isolation and a compelling desire to bridge the gap that lay before them. The boy's wide, curious eyes caught hers, reflecting a glimmer of hope that seemed incongruous in the desolate landscape surrounding them. Clara sensed the innocence in him, a stark contrast to the burdens they all carried. He shifted nervously, his posture revealing a raw vulnerability that touched her heart. Would he too be condemned to the cycles of conflict that had shaped their histories? In that moment, Clara understood that they were all warriors in their own right, navigating a world marred by the pain of the past, yet yearning for something greater, a truth waiting to be unveiled in the quiet moments suspended between breaths. The tension built like a storm cloud on the horizon, crackling with the weight of unspoken words. Clara's heart pounded as she contemplated the enormity of what lay ahead. The very ground they stood upon had once been bloodied by legacies of violence and retribution. Each second whispered of the choices that had led them here, forging an uncharted path toward recognition and understanding. Would she dare to embrace vulnerability, to allow their shared humanity to shine in the face of deep-rooted fear? Or would she retreat into the shadows, a prisoner of her own sorrow, perpetuating the rift that had long divided them? Clara took a breath, her chest tightening as the warrior's expression subtly shifted. A flicker of understanding passed between them. His eyes softened, and in that instant, she caught a glimpse of his own struggles, a mirror to her own. Perhaps, amid the intertwined tragedies, lay a possibility for healing that transcended the scars of their histories. She could sense his willingness to step beyond the confines of animosity, to offer her the truth he had learned in the silence of his own despair. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, a leap into the unknown that crackled in the air like the first surge of lightning. As Clara's gaze lingered on the young warrior, she felt the pull of something she had almost forgotten, the daring call of hope. In the sacred silence shared among the three, fragments of life's truths seemed to weave together, forming a tenuous bond that anchored them against the relentless tides of their respective worlds. She could no longer ignore the flicker of possibility that shimmered just out of reach, daring her to grasp it, to venture into the uncharted territory of connection. With the weight of her grief still hanging heavily upon her shoulders, Clara resolved that this moment could not pass without acknowledgement. She would not let despair dictate her choices any longer. With a heart both wrought with fear and buoyed by an unexpected courage, she stood ready to confront whatever lay ahead, an unlikely communion of souls poised on the cusp of transformation. As the silence stretched between Clara and the young warrior, the weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air. The evening sky deepened into shades of indigo, stars peeking out like timid onlookers. Clara's gaze lingered on the young man before her, the flickering firelight dancing across his features as he stood resolute yet inviting. In that shimmering glow, she glimpsed the battles etched into his skin, stories of survival and resilience that mirrored her own. Vulnerability crept in like the cool night air, wrapping around her heart, urging her to look beyond the barrier of her grief. The boy shifted, glancing towards the ground as if contemplating the enormity of this moment. Clara felt the swell of emotion rise within her, and without thinking, she knelt down to meet him at eye level, her skirt pooling around her. She offered a weak smile, one born from a desperate yearning to connect, to share a truth that had long been buried beneath sorrow. The boy responded, his expression softening as he returned her gaze with an innocence that felt almost sacred. It was a glimpse into a world untainted by hatred, a fleeting connection that pulsed with the possibility of understanding. The elder warrior, still standing, watched with an intensity that pierced through Clara's defenses. His presence was magnetic, drawing her attention like a moth to flame, igniting in her the embers of forgotten dreams. She felt the tension in his stance ease, as though he understood the quiet courage it took to break through the layers of despair that shrouded her existence. Clara's heart swelled with a mix of fear and longing, as if she were teetering on the edge of a precipice that held the promise of profound transformation. She could almost hear the whispers of her late husband, reminding her that connection could be a salve, a healing balm for the wounds that had festered in silence. In a moment of reckless abandon, Clara raised her trembling hand and brushed her fingertips against the young warrior's wrist, a brief yet electric touch that sent warmth coursing through her. It was an unguarded gesture, a spark igniting the brittle branches of her heart. The young warrior stood still, his eyes widening as he felt her tentative inquiry, the silent plea for understanding woven into that fleeting moment of closeness. The fire crackled behind them, casting shadows that danced and flickered, a manifestation of the emotional storm brewing within Clara, a tempest of grief, hope, and a desperate need for connection. As the night deepened, the boy watched them, curiosity etched in his youthful features. Clara turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper but steady. "You both know what it is to lose." Her words hung in the air, raw and unrefined, yet infused with a vulnerability that seemed to crack open the surface of her stoic demeanor. The boy nodded, a tender understanding passing between them like a silent vow, binding them through their shared experiences. He took a step closer, grounding Clara in a reality that felt both fragile and profound. The elder warrior stepped forward, lowering himself to her level, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Clara felt the weight of his gaze, heavy with the stories of his life, the truths he carried hidden beneath the scars of battle. "We survive," he murmured, his voice a husky whisper that resonated deep within her. In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the night, Clara understood that their worlds had collided, not to bring destruction, but to reveal the power of shared grief and hope, a reminder that even in the face of despair, the light of connection could still flicker amid the darkness. As they lingered in that fragile embrace of understanding, the boundaries separating their lives began to dissolve, leaving space for a new narrative to unfold, one of resilience, compassion, and the undeniable truth that they were, after all, not so different. Clara knelt in the cool soil, her heart racing as the young warrior's eyes bore into hers, a mirror reflecting the turbulence of their shared sorrows. The weight of unspoken words thickened the air, yet it was an unbreached silence that spoke louder than any declaration. Just beyond the flicker of the firelight, the darkness of night stretched out, an abyss filled with the echoes of her past. The boy watched intently, the innocence in his gaze casting a soft glow upon the moment, a reminder of the fragile beauty clinging to life amidst the scars of history. Clara felt the reverberations of her loneliness begin to ebb, replaced by an inkling of something profound swelling within, a longing for connection to surmount the chasm of despair that had defined her existence. The young warrior's expression shifted subtly, a tempest of emotions swirling behind the depths of his dark eyes. He stepped closer, the resolve in his posture speaking volumes without the need for words. Reaching out, he drew a small, meticulously crafted charm from around his neck, a token of his heritage, worn and weathered, yet pulsing with history. The leather cord hung between his fingers, the charm cradled in his palm. It bore the marks of both labor and love, a testament to the resilience that they both sought in these harsh lands. Clara's breath caught in her throat, and the air around them felt thick, charged with a shared understanding that transcended the silence. With a fluid motion that belied the weight of the moment, the young warrior extended the charm toward Clara, offering it as though it were the most sacred of gifts. Clara felt the warmth emanating from his hand, a beacon of hope that shimmered even in the enveloping darkness. She hesitated, the enormity of such a gesture sending ripples of uncertainty through her. The charm was not just an object, but a bridge between their worlds, a delicate strand connecting their stories. With an almost reverent slowness, Clara reached out, her fingers brushing against the worn leather, and for a heartbeat, time suspended itself, their lives hanging in the balance of that palpable connection. In that instant, Clara felt a surge of warmth spiral through her, igniting the dormant embers of her spirit. As she accepted the charm, a hush enveloped them, the silence shifting from one of uncertainty to a quiet communion. The young warrior's gaze held hers, an unspoken encouragement swirling in the depths of his eyes. The boy, still lingering nearby, sensed the shift as well. His youthful spirit breathed life into the stillness. And as Clara's fingers curled around the charm, she felt the weight of her grief begin to disperse, the burden she had carried starting to lift, just enough to allow a flicker of tenacity to reignite within her. The world fell away as Clara turned the charm over in her hands, tracing the intricate designs carved into the leather. Each mark seemed to tell a story of survival, of a lineage that had thrived against all odds. The truth behind the gesture unfurled in her heart. This was not merely a token, but a transformative offering, a reminder that life could still pulse vibrantly even amidst scars, that connection could rise from the ashes of past pain. Clara's chest tightened as realization washed over her. She was not alone. This young warrior, this boy, they understood her loss, for they too had navigated the treacherous waters of grief and desperation. As night continued to envelop them, Clara felt the boundaries that separated their worlds begin to dissolve further. The young warrior stepped back slightly, allowing her the space to absorb the enormity of his gift, yet his presence remained close, steadfast as the ever-present earth beneath them. Clara met his gaze with renewed determination, feeling the flicker of hope transform into something more. There, bathed in the fading light of day, a fragile bond began to weave itself among them, emboldened by the silent promise of understanding. From the depths of her despair, Clara sensed the possibility of healing flickering to life, ignited by the very act of acceptance, a transformative gesture that could carve a new path through the shadows of their collective pasts. The night deepened, wrapping Clara and the two warriors in its velvety embrace, where the stars above flickered like distant memories. As she cradled the charm in her hand, a sudden rush of sensations flooded her mind, images of sun-drenched days spent laughing and spinning beneath the vast sky, colored by the warmth of her late husband's embrace. But as the echoes of laughter faded, so too did the light, replaced by shadows that lingered beneath her heart. In the quiet of the moment, she found herself teetering on the precipice of a long-buried terror, the roots of her grief twisting tightly around recollections she could no longer ignore. The night Samuel died, it had rained heavily, each drop a percussion against the earth, drowning out the last echoes of their shared life. Clara remembered waking in a fright, the sound of distant hoofbeats merging with the thunder's roar. Fearing for their lives, she had grasped Samuel's arm as he reassured her that it was nothing, the fleeting gallop of wild mustangs perhaps. But the night bore a different truth, one that had arrived on sworn enemies' horses. Minutes later, a brutal confrontation erupted, a clash that stole her husband in an instant, leaving her to grapple not only with his absence, but the appalling realization that loss could come on the wings of violence. As the memory surfaced, tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, not just from the anguish of memory, but from the weight of the tale now woven into her understanding of the night. The warrior's charm felt heavy in her palm, and for a fleeting moment, Clara toyed with the notion of casting it aside, of retreating into the darkness that had become her constant companion. But she hesitated, for the young warrior's gaze remained steady, his eyes carrying a raw honesty that urged her to confront the past rather than escape it. He had offered her a piece of his world, a slice of his heritage, and in doing so, she found herself embracing the opportunity to bridge the chasm of hurt that had defined her existence. Clara turned her gaze toward the horizon, the sprawling expanse before her, now imbued with both terror and hope. How many nights had she sat alone, ensnared in the memory of her husband's laughter, aching for the lost comfort of companionship. The wind whispered tales of the past, and in that gentle caress, she understood that the past would forever linger like a haunting melody. yet it could also become a stepping stone toward healing. The charm was not merely a remnant of the rituals of another tribe, it was an invitation, a call to weave together their separate histories, to turn grief into something more powerful than pain. As the boy stepped closer, curiosity shining in his wide eyes, Clara sensed a thread of understanding binding her to the young warriors. They too bore the weight of loss, yet their resilience shone brighter than the shadows that taunted behind them. The young man's fierce determination reflected her own buried strength, urging her to transcend both fear and despair. Clara felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack, the heaviness of solitude slowly lifting as their unspoken connection wove a tapestry of shared struggle and survival. In that simple yet monumental exchange, every heartache she had carried began to dissolve, replaced by a flicker of hope that pulsed in time with the rhythm of the night. Clara found herself standing at the threshold of an awakening, a realization that the only way to honor Samuel's memory was not in lamentation, but through the embrace of life, however fragile it might seem. The young warrior's outstretched hand loomed larger than the grief that had stifled her spirit, an invitation to step into a new narrative, one that honored the sorrows of the past while daring to reach toward the possibilities of tomorrow. Breath caught in her throat, Clara nestled the charm close to her heart, her spirit ignited by the fervent longing for connection amidst the scars of history. It was a homage to both the struggle and the resilience of those who had come before her. As she met the young warrior's gaze, those ancient eyes radiated a promise that vulnerability could usher in healing, that the strength of shared stories might allow them to walk together through the darkness into the dawn of something new. It was a leap of faith, the first step toward unearthing the truth that lay buried not just within her, but among them all, waiting to crystallize in the flickering light of compassion. The night stretched longer, a shroud of tension wrapping around Clara and the two warriors, and what had begun as a fragile connection now felt laden with unacknowledged fears. The elder warrior's eyes flickered with a mixture of caution and curiosity as they stood on the precipice of understanding, yet a flicker of unease sparked within him. He straightened his posture, sensing the weight of history pressing down upon them, the shadows of their ancestors lingering just beyond the edges of their awareness. Clara's fingers curled tighter around the charm, her heart racing as she felt the pull of something monumental. A connection, yes, but also the potential for misunderstanding that hung thick in the air. The young man regarded her closely, his expression steadfast yet cautious, as if challenging the burgeoning bond with an unspoken question. He stepped forward, the grounding presence of the land beneath them echoing in the stillness. Then, with a voice that was low but strong, he broke the silence that had settled uncomfortably between them. "You mourn for your husband. Your sorrow is heavy," he said, his words deliberate, the weight of his observations pushing against Clara's heart like a tide threatening to engulf her. His honesty, akin to a blade, cut through the fragile strands of connection they had woven, and Clara found herself teetering on the edge of vulnerability. Clara struggled to meet his gaze, her breath hitching as she felt both seen and exposed. The young warrior's sincerity felt like a mirror, reflecting the very sorrow she had tried to articulate through the silent acceptance of his charm, yet she feared the implications of his words. In his eyes, she sensed the ghosts of countless lives lost to conflict, lives intertwined with her own through the pain of their shared existence. But was her grief an invitation to connection, or merely another thread woven into the tapestry of misunderstandings that had long defined their people? The boy shifted nervously, glancing between them as if sensing the ripple of tension that threatened to fracture the moment. He was still so young, standing at the crossroads of understanding, and Clara felt the weight of the world press down upon him. In the boy's innocent expression, she saw an embodiment of hope, yet the complexities of their realities threatened to pull him into the shadows that lingered just beyond their circle. Clara felt an overwhelming urge to shield him from the harsh truths that hovered between them, yet she could not ignore the truth of her own experience. The heaviness of her loss did not just belong to her. It was a shared narrative that echoed through the ages, one that was fraught with both pain and the potential for healing. The young warrior's words hung in the air, a challenge embedded in their simplicity. Clara inhaled sharply, feeling the brunt of his scrutiny, and a tumult of emotions surged within her, clashing against the walls of grief and anger that had built up over the years. "You think you understand," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You think that our sorrows are the same. But do you know the bitterness of watching someone you love die in your arms?" The words spilled out like a torrent, raw and unrefined, the anguish that had been locked inside her now a weapon aimed at the very connection she yearned for. The young warrior flinched, momentarily taken aback by her response. Her accusation hung heavy in the air, its weight transforming the atmosphere from tentative connection to charged confrontation. Clara felt vulnerability slip through her fingers as anger took hold. Her heart raced with fear that she might lose the fragile connection they had begun to forge. Yet, in the flicker of the warrior's gaze, she also noticed an ember of understanding, a recognition that pulsed beneath the surface of his unease. He stepped back slightly, arms crossed, letting the silence stretch between them, allowing Clara's rage to pour out unabated. The tension between them simmered, the air crackling with the intensity of their emotions, and in that moment of conflict, Clara caught a glimpse of the truth that lay buried beneath their shared struggles. It was a truth that would force them to confront the ghosts of their past, an opportunity to sift through the layers of pain and resentment that had long been etched into the fabric of their existence. Though their paths were fraught with misunderstanding, Clara felt the whisperings of an ancient connection, a desire to break free from the chains of their history, to uncover the complicity of their struggles, and together find a pathway toward redemption in a world that had long nurtured division. The air hung thick with tension, each heartbeat echoing Clara's unease as the confrontation unfolded beneath the weight of the night sky. The flickering flames cast long shadows against the browning earth, mirroring the tumult within her heart. The young warrior, still regarding her with those dark, fathomless eyes, stood a resolute figure, unwavering in the face of her fury. In that moment, Clara felt the fragile connection that had begun to weave itself between them strain under the force of her pain, as if the very dust of the land might swallow them both whole. But out in the distance, another sound broke the palpable silence, drawing their attention away from their clash, the distant, thunderous rumble of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Clara's heart lurched, and the vibrant pulse of anger within her flickered momentarily, overtaken by a chilling realization. The young warrior shifted, stepping closer to the boy, their shared expression betraying an urgency that Clara could not ignore. They were no longer alone. The threat was looming, an unwelcome harbinger of chaos that stirred the air, sending a shiver through the fabric of her reality. The young warrior turned sharply, his focus honing in on the ridge where shadows danced, growing larger. Clara felt a rush of adrenaline as she rose to her feet, instinctively scanning the horizon, searching for signs of what they might face. The night had become an adversary, the darkness concealing threats that surged like a tide. Each thundering beat of the approaching horses echoed in her chest, a primal call for survival that rendered her fears palpable. She could taste the dust in her mouth, feel the chill of dread wrapping tight around her throat. Without a word, the elder warrior placed himself firmly in front of Clara and the boy, his posture an embodiment of resilience and protection. Clara's pulse quickened as she felt the weight of their predicament. This was a world where danger lurked behind every shadow, and the fragile bonds they had begun to forge could shatter in an instant. Her anger felt trivial now, washed away by the rising tide of uncertainty as the approaching riders appeared on the crest of the hill, silhouetted against the starlit sky. An ominous sense of foreboding hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Clara's breath hitched as she squinted against the darkening landscape, the figures rapidly morphing from distant shapes to menacing entities, triumphant riders of the past, their intentions cloaked in hostility. She felt the young warrior's presence beside her. They stood united against the encroaching threat, a testament to their shared understanding in a world that sought to fracture them. The boy clutched at the hem of her dress, grounding her in a moment that spiraled toward chaos, and for the first time, Clara realized that the strength in their connection was not just a fragile thread, but a lifeline. As the riders drew closer, the air vibrated with tension, the echoes of hooves smothering the calm of the night. Clara stole another glance at the young warrior, whose fierce determination stoked the embers of her own bravery. She felt the fiery spirit within awaken. Perhaps this confrontation was not merely a threat, but an opportunity, a chance to confront the ghosts that haunted her and forge a new path toward redemption for all of them. It was a chance to stand firm against the tides of fear and reclaim a sense of agency even in the shadow of darkness, even when the weight of her past threatened to drown her. Just then, the riders halted, their figures framed against the darkening sky, and within that moment, Clara felt the world around her tilt. The reality of their shared histories bared its teeth, snarling in the face of the moment. Yet the boy stood unwavering at her side, the young warrior locked in a stance of resolve, and Clara felt the flicker of hope igniting once more, a small fire that dared to blaze bright even in the face of overwhelming odds. They were bound together now, not merely by the chains of sorrow, but by the promise of survival forged in the fires of understanding. The night became a canvas, painted with the colors of confrontation, redemption, and the strength that lay just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. As the riders loomed closer, their silhouettes emerged with a menacing clarity against the vast Texas sky, like a storm gathering strength as it swept across the plains. Clara stood frozen, rooted by a mixture of fear and an indefinable hope that flickered within her. Beside her, the young warrior held his ground, fierce determination etched in every line of his face, while the boy clutched Clara's hem more tightly, as if their shared vulnerability could weave an invisible shield against the encroaching darkness. Something stirred in the air between them, a silent bond forged in the depths of shared anguish, an unspoken loyalty that surged in the quiet of the night. The distant thrum of hoofbeats pounded like a war drum, an urgent reminder that conflict had come to gnaw at the edges of their fragile connection. Clara drew a breath, steadying herself against the tide of anxiety that threatened to sweep her away. The young warrior's posture shifted, instinctually mirroring the tension in the air, while the boy glanced between them, wide-eyed and trembling, a reflection of the uncertainty that gripped them all. They stood, huddled together, an unlikely triad of survival amidst a backdrop that had long been woven with blood and strife. As the riders approached, their features became discernible, clad in leather and bone, faces set in stern lines, shadows dancing across their features like whispers of forgotten grievances. Clara's heart raced, a primal instinct urging her to flee, yet she felt the young warrior stand firm at her side, embodying an unyielding spirit that coaxed strength from the depths of her sorrow. The elder warrior held his ground, his gaze steady, reflecting the resolve that had lived within him long before she ever crossed paths with him in this unforgiving land. In that moment, they appeared less like adversaries and more like protectors, unified against the tide of violence that threatened to spill forth. The riders halted, their horses snorting in the chill night air, and a silence fell, dense and laden with the weight of history. Clara's chest tightened, an echo of loss reverberating through her as she confronted the storm of fear that raged within. But amidst that turmoil, the presence of the young warrior alongside the boy anchored her with a fierce loyalty that felt almost sacred. They were bound not only by their shared struggles, but by a depth of understanding that transcended spoken words. She could feel their strength as if it wrapped around her like a protective cloak, urging her to stand strong against the tempest. The young warrior shifted slightly, his stance subtle yet commanding, embodying a quiet defiance against the riders who now occupied their shared space. Clara's focus sharpened on his movements. There was grace in his posture that belied the tension thrumming beneath the surface. She felt the intertwining of their destinies, a thread woven through the fabric of despair and resilience, connecting them irrevocably in a moment that could change everything. The boy, too, radiated an innocence that felt akin to a precious spark, nodding slightly as if to affirm their unspoken pact. The three of them united against the ghosts of their pasts. In the stillness that followed, Clara's breath seemed to synchronize with the pulse of the land, an audible reminder that they were part of something far greater than themselves. The riders exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in the eyes of those who had long been trained to view the world in stark absolutes. But here, in this space between the known and the unknown, Clara felt a cautious hope bloom, nestled tightly amidst the shadows of doubt. Together, they could defy the narratives of fear that had once sought to define them, standing as living testaments to the possibility that understanding could thrive even in the aftermath of pain. And so they remained, silently loyal to one another, hearts entwined in the delicate balance of courage and uncertainty. Clara's fingers brushed against the charm the young warrior had gifted her, feeling its weight, a tether reminding her of the transformative power of connection. With the riders still poised on the brink of confrontation, she understood that the future lay suspended in the air, pregnant with possibilities that beckoned her forward, a chance to carve a new fate from the ashes of despair. Together, they would face whatever was to come, bound by the shared flame of survival that flickered brightly between them, defying the darkness that sought to consume them whole. The air thickened with an electric tension as the riders gazed down at Clara and the two young warriors, their expressions a tapestry of skepticism and caution. Shadows danced against the backdrop of time's relentless march, weaving a history fraught with unspoken grievances and long-held fears. Clara felt the weight of those histories settle over her shoulders, each heartbeat a reminder of the collective scars borne by the land and its people. The riders, hardened by the realities of survival, marked their territory with an unwavering intensity, an unyielding reminder of who they believed they were meant to be. As the first rider dismounted, the earth trembled beneath him, a beast of a man with sunburnt skin and eyes hardened by loss. Clara instinctively tilted her head back, her gaze locked on his, absorbing the tales etched into the lines of his face. Stories of a people scattered, a legacy eroded. He stood close, almost imposing, a storm cloud threatening to unleash its fury but caught in the stillness of the moment. The young warrior beside Clara straightened, a quiet dignity radiating from him, as though he had stepped into the role of mediator, a bridge between despair and understanding. A flicker of defiance shimmered in their shared silence. Then, without a word, the elder warrior lifted his chin, an ancient challenge that dared the riders to confront the truths buried beneath layers of history. His eyes bore the weight of generations, reflecting the shared pain of a people who had witnessed their lands pillaged and their lives reduced to mere specters of what once was. Clara felt the fabric of their connection thrum with urgency, a testament to the understanding that lay just beneath the chaos swirling around them. Perhaps this was the moment they could redefine their futures, woven from the wisdom of the past, but untethered from its darkness. The second rider, younger and perhaps more conflicted, lingered back, his gaze searching for an opening in the confrontation. Clara caught his eye, and for a brief moment their gazes met, revealing a vulnerability that flickered beneath the surface of his hardened exterior. It was a glimpse into a soul that recognized the cost of loss, a shared reflection that reached across the chasm of their histories. Clara felt her own fear subside for an instant. nudged back by a growing realization that connecting their stories could unlock something transformative, something that could begin to unravel the bitter threads binding them all to a cycle of violence. With a swift movement, the elder warrior stepped forward, the distance between them closing, and in that exchange of silence, Clara sensed the truth beginning to rise, an unearthing of buried pain and a call to redemption. "I lost my brother," the young man spoke, his voice low but steady as he directed it toward Clara and the riders. "He died in a battle, fought for land that was never ours to claim, an echo of a war that forged enemies of us all." The weight of his admission hung in the air, thickening the atmosphere as Clara absorbed the depths of his grief, recognizing the tragic parallels that bound them together. The riders shifted uneasily, their eyes glinting with a mixture of realization and resistance. Clara felt the emotion cascade through her as the weight of their shared sorrow forged an unexpected connection, weaving an intricate tapestry of understanding among those who had long regarded one another with hostility. As the elder warrior spoke of the cycles of loss that had plagued their people for generations, she felt the heart of the land echo with the truths finally laid bare. "I mourn my husband," Clara whispered softly, her voice barely rising above the distant rustle of the wind. "And the dreams we shared, we lost so much to the brutality of hate." In that moment, vulnerability stripped away her defenses, allowing the enormity of their grief to intertwine as a fragile thread woven through the fabric of their existence. Clara's heart raced, teetering on the precipice of hope born from understanding as the young warrior offered her a nod, solidifying their unspoken alliance, a shared recognition of the need to transcend the legacies of their past and acknowledge the monumental truth that lay before them. As the tension in the air thickened, Clara felt a shift beneath the weight of their vulnerability. The winds that swept across the Texas panhandle turned restless, swirling dust around their feet like the ghosts of their past traumas come to haunt them anew. The riders' faces hardened, cemented with uncertainty, and Clara sensed the tenuous thread connecting them all beginning to fray. With their histories laid bare, a new challenge emerged, a test of their fragile bond that hung perilously between connection and the specter of violence that loomed on the horizon. The elder warrior stepped closer to the dismounted rider, his body taut with unspoken caution, challenging the man's hardened expression with quiet strength. Clara watched as the unyielding tension radiated from them, a palpable force that hovered above, threatening to shatter their fragile truce. The boy shifted anxiously at her side, his youthful innocence at odds with the imminent clash that seemed to hang in the air like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Clara's heart raced, each beat an echo of the uncharted territory they stood on, where the past and present collided, threatening to swallow them all whole. "Words are wind," the elder warrior spoke, his voice steady yet laden with the weight of history. The sharpness of his tone cut through the air, a reminder of the thin line between conflict and understanding. Clara felt the shiver of collective anxiety that passed among them, the riders visibly tensing, unsure of how to respond. The very ground felt alive beneath her feet, a vital connection that urged them to confront the truth of their shared existence. Clara's breath caught as she drew strength from the young warrior beside her, silently calling upon the hope that had begun to unfurl among them like the wings of a bird desperate for flight. As the air crackled with apprehension, Clara unwrapped her own silence, her voice small yet determined, as she stepped forward, emboldened by the bond they had begun to forge. "We all share a history of loss," she said, her gaze steady as she addressed both the elder warrior and the riders. Tension rippled through the group, each person caught in the delicate balance of mistrust and yearning for connection. Clara felt the pulse of life around her, the weight of their possibilities echoing louder than the voices of vengeance whispering from their pasts. She grasped the charm the young warrior had given her, its warmth a tangible reminder of the compassion that had sparked between them. But the riders remained unmoved, their wariness rooted in centuries of conflict. One of them stepped forward, fists clenched, his face a mask of uncertainty that belied the rage simmering just below the surface. "You don't understand what it means to be hunted, for your people to be pushed to the brink," he growled. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, the challenge hanging heavy in the air as the young warrior instinctively shifted slightly, positioning himself closer to her, a protective barrier against the anger coiling instinctively in the rider's form. Each breath became a battleground, a testament to the choice they faced, violence or reconciliation. In that shared silence, the weight of history bore down upon them, yet Clara felt a flicker of courage ignite within her, a spark kindled by the unity they had dared to find. "We've all suffered," she said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "But if we let our pain become our chains, we risk losing the chance for something greater, for understanding." The young warrior's gaze bore into hers, an unspoken understanding passing between them, as if he saw the determination burning within her. The elder warrior remained steadfast, a silent sentinel, as Clara's plea hung in the air, tenuously balancing on the brink of acceptance. The air quivered with the weight of their collective sorrows, yet Clara sensed the potential for transformation pulsing just beneath the surface. As the riders exchanged glances, uncertainty flickered in their eyes, a crack in the armor of animosity that had long defined their interactions. Clara held her breath as she witnessed the delicate dance of vulnerability unfurling around them. She knew that the outcome of this moment would not simply reflect their pasts, but carve the path forward for all of them. Time seemed to stretch, pregnant with possibilities as the stars watched from above, silent witnesses to the story unfolding below. The fate of their lives rested on the choices they would make, not in the heat of battle, but in the capacity to embrace their shared humanity. The silence hung heavy, stretching the air taut with unspoken fears as the riders considered Clara's words. The night deepened, shadows clinging to the contours of their faces, revealing the fissures along the lines of their collective grief. Clara held her breath, heart pounding, sensing the fragile flicker of hope that danced dangerously close to extinction. The young warrior beside her remained steadfast, a bulwark against the swirling uncertainty, while the boy clamped his small hand around Clara's leg, grounding her in the moment. She could almost feel the warmth of his innocence wrapping around her heart, urging her to press on. The rider who had stepped forward glanced back at his companions, their faces a jumble of emotions, confusion, anger, and the dawning of understanding mingling beneath the surface. It was the kind of moment that felt suspended in time, where the past threatened to eclipse the present. Clara felt the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, a reminder of the histories they all carried, yet it was the feel of the charm pressed tightly in her palm that anchored her. She had not come this far just to retreat into despair. She knew now that the land beneath them had witnessed enough pain, a witness to both the past and the potential yet to unfold. "Understanding comes in many forms," Clara ventured, her voice steadying as she stepped closer to the riders, emboldened by the warmth of the young warrior's presence. "We've all been shaped by our losses. It's time we let those scars remind us of our strength instead of binding us to our anger." The words felt like a prayer, a plea not just for her own healing, but for the possibility of something greater, an invitation to rise above the fractured legacies that had burdened their existence. In that moment, she glimpsed the flickers of recognition emerging in the riders' expressions, a glint of humanity that threatened to fracture the veil between them. The elder warrior stepped forward, his stature commanding, yet tempered by the gravity of the moment. His gaze flickered between the riders and Clara, an understanding igniting in the depths of his eyes. "We bear the weight of history, yet it's in recognizing our shared humanity that we may find redemption," he pronounced, his voice low and resonant, cutting through the heaviness in the air. Clara felt the depth of his conviction, the quiet strength that rose from his own pain, a testament to the resilience they all carried. For the first time, the riders shifted, their expressions softening as they began to understand the fragile bridge being constructed between them. The younger rider took a step back, uncertainty flickering on his brow. Clara caught his eye, sensing an echo of her own struggles reflected in his uncertainty. She held her gaze steady, imploring him to see her not as an adversary, but as a sister in sorrow. In that moment of vulnerability, the veil of animosity began to fray, revealing the undeniable truth that they were bound by more than their grief. They were woven into the fabric of a history that demanded new beginnings. The atmosphere hummed with the electricity of resolve, and Clara could feel the weight of centuries lifting, albeit just slightly. In the stillness that followed, the elder warrior extended a hand toward the riders, a gesture that transcended words, an invitation to step beyond the shadows that had defined them for so long. Clara's heart swelled as she witnessed the young warrior beside her echo that gesture, his solidarity a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The riders hesitated, caught between the weight of their pasts and the potential for renewal that hovered just out of reach. Clara could scarcely breathe, aware of the precipice on which they all stood. The choice between continuing the cycle of vengeance or embracing a new path anchored in understanding lay before them. And then one of the riders took a tentative step forward, hand reaching out, a tentative bridge of reconciliation that sent a tremor of emotion coursing through Clara. The warmth of connection enveloped her, a fierce light igniting in the stillness of night as the air shifted, laden now with a new promise. Clara felt her heart swell with the hope she had almost relinquished, washing over her like a cleansing rain. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment when souls, once divided by the horrors of history, dared to intertwine anew in the spirit of redemption. It was a fragile triumph, yet in that shared breath of understanding, Clara felt her dignity restored, her spirit lifted by the undeniable truth that they could forge a new legacy together. As the riders and the warriors approached one another, the night breathes anew, the darkness slowly retreating beneath the brilliance of a dawn yet to break. Clara closed her eyes, letting the weight of her loss transform into something lighter, a reminder of the capacity for healing that lay within them all. Here, amid the shadows of the past, she found a glimmer of light breaking through, a possibility that the cycle of grief could give way to something profound, a tapestry woven with resilience, unity, and the unyielding strength of shared humanity. The dawn broke with a gentle blush across the horizon, painting the sky with hues of soft pink and gold as Clara stood among the remnants of their shared fears. The air felt different now, charged with the promise of new beginnings as the young warriors and the riders bridged the gap that had long defined their lives. Clara breathed deeply, taking in the crisp morning air, the scent of damp earth mingling with the remnants of night. Hope was a fragile creature, but one that fluttered within her breast, daring to take flight on the wings of understanding they had begun to forge. The elder warrior's outstretched hand spoke volumes, a silent communication that transcended the barriers built by history. The first rider, with uncertainty etched upon his brow, accepted the gesture, his calloused palm meeting the young warrior's in cautious agreement. Clara watched, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, as if the very earth beneath them had shifted, awakening something dormant within their souls. The boy at her side shifted, eyes wide, and Clara felt a warmth emanate from him, an unspoken belief that perhaps, just perhaps, their lives would pivot toward something resembling peace. As the tension began to dissipate, the riders exchanged glances with one another, their defenses slowly lowering, replaced by a flicker of mutual recognition. Clara could see it in their eyes. The weight of shared sorrow began to dissolve the animosity that had long festered. In that moment, they became vessels of a greater truth, a realization that their struggles were intertwined, lost brothers, fallen dreams, and the heavy cost of a world steeped in bloodshed. The sun continued its ascent, casting warm rays over the land, illuminating the contours of their faces as if nature herself celebrated the fragile truce they had forged. The young warrior, a living testament to resilience, stood tall beside Clara, his expression softened by the dawn's light. She caught his gaze, and in that fleeting moment, the world around them faded. It was just the two of them, bound by shared histories that had once threatened to tear them apart. Clara felt a swell of gratitude rising within her, a recognition that their connection had become a lifeline in the vast sea of loss. They had glimpsed the truth buried beneath the rubble of their grief, a shimmering thread of compassion that pulsed with the potential for redemption. Together they had begun to carve a new narrative, and in doing so, they reclaimed a sliver of their humanity. As the riders and warriors engaged in quiet conversation, Clara remained anchored in the moment, the charm resting against her chest, a talisman of newfound courage. She turned her attention to the boy, his innocent gaze reflecting a spark of hope that shone brighter than any dawn. His hand slipped into hers, small and warm, a reminder that the bonds they were forging extended beyond themselves. In that simple act, Clara felt the weight of her sorrow begin to lighten, the burden of solitude lifting as the warmth of connection blossomed between them. A shared promise that they would walk this path together. The sun rose higher, illuminating their surroundings with a golden glow, transforming the once fraught landscape into a canvas of possibility. Clara and the young warrior stood side by side, the boy nestled between them, anchored in this moment of hope. They were no longer alone in their grief. They had found allies in one another, a shared destiny that whispered of renewal rather than destruction. As the past began to fade, like the mist retreating from the sun's embrace, Clara felt the fragile flicker of hope ignite into a steady flame, a newfound resolve that would carry them forward. Together, they would navigate this uncharted territory, weaving their stories into a harmonious tapestry defined not by loss, but by the promise of redemption.